Hi folks, today we're going to be looking at some work by George Cozens, who's doing a final project. So let's see what it's about. Okay, so first of all, this is a cathedral or a church that's based on the Warhammer world apparently. So the statue in the back, they said, is a placeholder, so I'm going to ignore that for now. But we'll have a look at everything else. So the first thing that jumps out to me is these windows here. The texture on them is squashed. And I appreciate that to get it to fit in there, but what I would suggest you do is take the original image with the skulls and stuff, cut those parts out, and then stretch them out to the regular size again, or re-import the original one and overlay it on top. Just because the skull, it feels like it feels like it stands out as being wrong because it's squashed in. Also, with the lighting on this, it's coming through sort of completely bright. Whereas if it was coming through stained glass, it would be multicolored and it would look like that. So double check what you've got going on with your translucency settings here. At the moment, you might just be trying to fake it with like an emissive or something, but yeah, set it to the correct translucency. And if that still doesn't work for you, try using a light function with that texture on it, and that will allow you to sort of light through the windows. It'll be a little more expensive, but it will give the effect that you're after. And if you're just working with stills, it's not a major issue. If it's meant to be playable, it'll be a bit more expensive, but still, overall, should be okay. Also, I want to point out, by the way, that I love the general vibe that you've got going on in this scene. It's very cool. I kind of like you've got kind of like this separation of warm and cold going on. I'm not entirely sure I'm super fond of that at the moment, because it's like, where's the blue light coming from, you know? If you've got all this warm candlelight going on, you'd expect more of a blue fill throughout everything with highlights of the warm candlelight, whereas instead we've got a lot of warmth going on. So like if you squint, you can see there's like a yellowy white band at the front and then a greeny blue band at the back. You'd expect this to also be a bit more naturally coloured. But, you know, it's not all about the lighting. Let's have a look at some other stuff. So the candles that you've got here, let's see, is there a closer shot? Okay, here we go. Yeah, so at the moment, I'm not sure what's going on here. Are these embers that are floating around in the game, or are these just wicks that have been offset, like not moved and the candles have, that kind of thing? So at the moment, your candles have got a light source, but there's no actual flame there. So just double check that, be careful, because that kind of thing can really take away from a great scene like this. So yeah, just be wary of that. Also, the wood that you're using here seems quite noisy. But again, it could just be me. It's kind of hard to see properly in this, but I feel like you could probably use something with like a longer grain so that it's got less sort of breakup horizontally, if that makes sense. Because the smaller something is and the more frequent it is, the noisier it's going to be. But overall though, like I said, cool vibes. Watch out for stuff like this where you've got the exact same piece repeating twice. This kind of stands out as repetition. And that tends to be a fairly common thing, to be fair. That's obviously not just you. That's something that happens quite often, especially in these kind of projects where you're trying to get things done and there's a lot to do. Like I was a victim of this. My final major project ended up being pretty terrible, but that's because I give myself too much work to do, which is a classic student thing to do, to overscope at a project. But I think you've done a good job here so far. I'd keep an eye on stuff like this. So this, obviously, I feel like this section is going to be like a modular section, or maybe even the whole pillars. But it means that you're getting this repeating darker brick every time. If you can, I'd suggest doing this part instead as a tileable texture, and then offset the UVs a little bit, or apply an offset in your material, and that'll help just break that up a little bit. Okay, this is interesting. You've got a lot of candles here. I'm assuming you're using just a couple of larger light sources for this. You can see some sort of rounder sections here. That's good to do in gameplay. You don't want to have a light source for every single one of those candles. That would be nuts. But yeah, just be careful about how illuminated that area is, because it feels quite intense. Your candles don't tend to have this kind of level of emission going on when they're lit. They tend to have more of a subtle, like this kind of thing, but maybe a bit more, something like this. And you have what's called subsurface scattering within the candle wax, where light can penetrate it, but not perfectly. So it's like when you look through your ear in the sunlight. You can't do it here, but you know what I mean? If you hold a light behind your ear, you can kind of see through it a little bit, but not fully. That's kind of subsurface scattering. So the light hits the surface and spreads within it. And it kind of gives that kind of look of, it's like it's lit, but it's not fully lit. So let's see, scroll up to this one. Okay, this is pretty cool. I think I'd be careful of the amount of repetition you're seeing here. And I get most, churches have this kind of stuff all the time where there's repeating archways and things, but personally I would remove every other one of these. So maybe this one, and then you'd rejig them to fill the space a bit better. Because at the moment, this is meant to be the focal point, right? This statue in the middle, and the lights that lead to it, which is a pretty cool way of leading the eye. But you're getting a lot of noise on the sides. Now this could, you could theoretically keep this in certain places. So for example, this section here could keep all the characters, and maybe the archers get reduced to every other one. Or maybe the other way around, maybe for structural reasons, if this is a really long corridor, you would need more of those archers. But in this situation, that's not the case. So I would personally suggest to reduce how many there are. It makes it quite noisy after a certain point. And again, the squashed images are quite obvious here. Like it looks like it's squashed in, and you don't really want that. That detracts from what you're trying to do. Okay, this scene's pretty cool. Something that you can do to help avoid repetition, which is a fairly simple thing. See here, you've got these two pipes. Well, you can see you've got the exact same patches of roughness happening in the same places. I assume this could be one asset, and if that's the case, this will be a little harder to do. But usually in a game, for something this size, you could potentially use a kit to make it. So you'd have a straight pipe piece would be part of the kit, and then a curved pipe piece would be a different part of the kit, and then it'd be made off of 1, 2, 3 pieces basically. So what you do in that case is you just grab one of these, rotate it a little bit, and then this roughness would be facing a different way, and you'd have some variation, even though you're using exactly the same piece. But if in this situation, if this is one big model, then what I suggest you do is maybe have a second version which has the UVs of each piece individually offset in different ways, just so that the tileable that it's using is shifted slightly and the roughness isn't going to show up in the same place. That just helps break things up a little bit. The stairs here are looking interesting. You've done some offset here, which is good because you don't want it to be exactly the same. Is this a shadow from a light? I feel like I can't tell if this is a shadow from something or if this is just an offset brick that's been offset by the same amount each time to just move it over. I think it is a shadow. But yeah, so let me just zoom in a second. Zoom in some more. Good old PDFs. Okay, again, we've got some issues here with light sources not being in the right place. I feel like these flames are where this cage used to be, maybe. But yeah, just make sure that they're adjusted and put in the correct place, because you don't want, like, stuff like that just pulls you straight out. Also, is this untextured? Yeah, I think these are some block out elements, so it makes sense. You're still working on the project, that's fine. You did mention that. But just keep an eye on making sure that things are obvious, that they're still placeholder. One thing that is very useful, which we tend to do in the industry quite a bit, is something that isn't finished yet, make it fluorescent pink. Unless it's messing with the lighting a lot, in which case don't do that. But for the most part, for a scene like this where there's only a few people working on it, make this a colour that stands out, because then you've got that part left to do. Or at least do it once for one day, make a list of everything that's left to do, or screenshots or whatever it might be, and then you've got a list to work through. So you can change everything back to grey then, so it doesn't damage your lighting as much. And then you've got that list of things that were left to to be worked on. But yeah, overall this is pretty cool. I'd say, I assume that is this sculpted in? This part is feeling kind of soft, like a little doughy to me. I'd say if it's sculpted, go in and just try and use like a damn standard brush around the outside of it, and then pinch a little bit, just to really give it a little bit of embossment, if that makes sense, rather than it being like kind of soft at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it looks cool. I like this character, like, sort of Warhammer adjacent stuff. What's going on here? So there's like cage lighting here, but I don't see a cage on that candle. It might just be because of the PDF. Oh, there is one. Okay. So I'm assuming your light source is right in the middle of that and it's projecting out like crazy. I would reduce the strength of your shadows on that, or the distance of them, because it doesn't need to be that extreme. It's a candle, it wouldn't be that strong from that distance. And yeah, your bricks are pretty cool. I think they might be a bit wet, but I get why you've done that, because it gives some nice reflections going on. But again, I'd just be careful to not overdo stuff. It's very easy to overdo things. What's going on here? Is this a pool of some kind? I think it's a pool. I think oh wait, no, is this in the foreground? Okay, you know what? yeah, it's an optical illusion. I saw this as being in the ground further backwards. So yeah, what I'd suggest to do with this is have something down here that's kind of underlit, and it gives it a bit of a rim light so that you can see it's a separate thing in the foreground. Because yeah, at the moment, with this just being where it is and it's being jet black underneath it, it's really hard to see where it's supposed to be. Also, on the note of things being jet black, that basically never happens in nature. Things always have a very slight bit of light, whether it's the moonlight or whatever it might be. So what you should do is use your skylight and give it a very slight, just a very slight little bump. So even in the shadows, all your darkest shadows will still have a little bit of light in them. And if you don't have time for that because of, you know, your deadline coming up, you could always do it with a post process of giving basically raising the darks very slightly. But be careful doing it that way, because that will affect your scene overall. And because it's post production, it kind of it can mess with your levels a bit more, you know, on a global scale. Whereas if you did it with a skylight, it would kind of, the other stuff, the mediums and highlights, would help balance out with what's already there. But yeah, stuff like this, it's pitch black over here. You know, you want some illusion of what's going on over there, because at the moment, it's like you got your focal point and then nothing. You know, so that's cool for framing in a way, but you also don't want to fully ignore what's going on there. Also, speaking of framing, you're kind of central here, but not fully. So if you're going to have things central, then have them central. If you're going to do things a bit tilted, go for more sort of like a third through the shot. If you imagine a third of the frame is about here and about here. So yeah, you give or take sort of in the middle part of it, but you might want to be more to the left. So you've got more of this happening, sort of leading you in to what's going on at the back. Or if you're going to have it central, then move everything slightly to the right so that you've got an equidistant amount of space between here and here. Because see, at the moment, you've got like a whole extra wall pane here. It's not major, it's just little tweaks like that help make things look a little bit better. This normal keeps catching my eye on the shield here. It's got a lot of horizontal stuff going on. If this is... Oh, this is quite low res here. Yeah, if this is something like a texture that you've downloaded, I would just be careful about how extreme that is. Maybe tone it down a little bit. Again, this could be placeholder, but if it's just a generic cement or something like that, you don't want it to be that strong. Also, this detail here is quite low res, so I think maybe your model might be out of textile density. So textile density is basically a rule set that you apply to your scene at the beginning, meaning that you say, for example, for every meter, it's going to be a 1024 texture, right? That means that for every meter of floor, that is going to be the equivalent of one 1024 texture. Whereas if you had, so say if you grab this piece of floor now and you scaled it up by 2, it's still got the same texture on it, but now the second version is bigger and it's going to look a bit worse because it's blurrier, because that now doesn't have the same textile density as the first one did, meaning that you just got things out of scale, and that thing can happen quite easily. So for example here, this looks a lot blurrier than, you know, the detail on the wax here, because they're in different textile densities. And it is quite a weird thing to get your head around. I'll do a proper tutorial about it one day. But anyway, for the time being, let's get through this feedback. I realize I'm eating up your time with stuff that you don't need to be super knowledgeable on right now, just be aware of. And like I said, I'll do a proper tutorial about it in the future. Okay, so it looks like we've got some more light leaking here. I assume this is from this light source, which is just not getting stopped by the window. And it's hitting the benches and they're kind of breaking up the light, which is fine. But yeah, have a look at these windows. I think it does need resolving, because that would change a lot of what's in here. I think it would adjust the colors that you see, and it'd be nice to have some sort of bleed on the walls of this sort of golden yellow and greens or blacks around it, whatever it is. That'd look really cool. And up here, again, we've got a similar issue to before, where you just can't see that there's something else here. It's like a chandelier or something like that, but basically, because it's so dark behind it, you can't see that. So yeah, your skylight adjustment should help fix that. If the background is slightly lighter, you'll be able to see the silhouette of this object. And if you can see the silhouette of an object, it's easier to see where it lives within the depth of a scene. And depth is super important. In fact, if you really want things to stand out, you could apply some depth of field into your post-processing when you do your final renders. If this is going to be a render scene, it might be playable for all I know. But yeah, if you have something like some depth of field work going on, let me see if I can find a good example. So let me see. There was something before with the thing in the foreground. Yeah, so this this could be a cool way of doing it. So what you would do is basically your focal point, which would be here, will be fully in focus, but then things that are closer to the camera like this will be slightly blurred. They'll be slightly out of focus. And it just kind of, it acts like a real lens would in those situations. Like more expensive lenses on real cameras tend to have a depth of field to them. That's what gives things a more filmic look rather than a virtual look. Because at the moment, everything in the scene is sharp in all places, which just doesn't happen with lenses. You don't tend to get that with real lenses in the real world. And that's what gives a kind of an uncanny valley feel to things. Same with perfectly sharp edges on stuff. You know, see how poker straight this line is and how poker straight this line is? You don't tend to get that in reality. So if this is made out of, like, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be made out of. If it's like cast, you know, cement, or if it's meant to be cast metal or something like that, it would have some variation going on, not just being poker straight. So stuff like that, be on the lookout for. So for example, the candle looks great because it's not poker straight. It's got some adjustments and some variety to the shape of it, to the silhouette. Whereas you would here is absolutely 100% poker straight. And even the best, you know, craftsman in the world wouldn't make an absolutely poker straight bench. You know, there's always going to be some variation, some breakup. So have little bits that, you know, not like mega chunks out of it, but have little bits where it's kind of slightly nudged in. You know, it's just, think about some storytelling. So parts where, like, think about this. If this is the end bench, so many people have got to knock that on the way past with a bag or, you know, a weapon or whatever it might be. It's constantly getting brushed past. And on that note as well, actually, the floor itself, if you think about this, is going to be a commonly used location, right? It's a church. Church is used weekly in most cultures, you know, at least. So if you think about it that way, there should be some more wear in the central regions, you know, where people go to the benches, they sit down and stuff. And I know you've got some damaged tiles, but at the moment, they're kind of like scattershot. You know, it's like wherever you want. In fact, I think, yeah, it's a tileable, isn't it? I've just noticed. Okay, so you've got these three damaged ones together and this one, and then it repeats. Okay, yeah, be careful of that as well. You want to break that up a bit. So if you're using a tileable like that on the floor, you can break that up by having cuts in the floor. And then in certain areas, so for example, you could have this information over here because you've cut the polys and it allows you to move the UVs to a separate location. That's a good way of doing that. Or if you could actually have these as floor pieces that you place around. So for example, you could cut this one up into 4, cut this one into 4, cut this one into 4. Then you can, cut these 4 into 1, sorry. So this is a 2x2 that you cut up. This would be a 2x2 that you cut up. And this could be a 2x2 that you cut up. And then you can place them throughout the scene. And that would really help to give you some variety and some breakup in what's going on. The benches as well. The benches, you know, they're looking pretty good. They're fairly straightforward, like literally as well. They're very poker straight. So like I said, give some variation to that. Think about when people sit down. Over the years, this is going to start to wear down of so many people putting their coats over the back or, you know, sitting down with armor on, whatever the world requires. So, yeah, think about the storytelling elements behind what you're doing as well. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I can spot before we finish because, yeah, I think there's a lot of the same assets used throughout the scene, which is great. You want that, but it's important to try and break the repetition and just to do some due diligence of making sure things like the light sources are in the right locations for what they're supposed to be. So for example, if these like sort of fire pits, the fire should be at the bottom of these, right? That's how they normally work, like a brazier or something like that. It may be different. It may be something lore dependent that I don't know about because I'm not hugely into Warhammer, so I don't know the world very well. But just be aware of that kind of stuff. Same with these candles. You know, you've got no light source in here. You've got plenty of light coming from these, but you've got no actual lights here. Also, be wary of having one light source for 2 things. It's fine to do that for performance reasons, but here you can see you've got like a central hotspot. You can clearly see the radius of that light. So just try and pull it back a little bit. And dial it down a little bit so that it's not as obvious where that central source is. This is kind of cool how these are glowing behind it. It gives a sense of some sort of like furnace behind there that's powering everything, which is pretty funky. Okay, again, be careful of repetition here. See, and obviously this is going to be one bench asset, that's fine. But here you can see you've got the same thing over and over and over and over. Same here. So the same point of information. A good way to avoid this kind of thing is to split the asset so that you're not just one long bench. But instead, you've got a cut in the middle and you can then change, where some of these are so you can break it up. So sometimes this one can be like over here And then, you know, this one could be like over here, you know, so you've got some variation happening rather than just having the same thing over and over again. Another thing you can do to avoid repetition and add some breakup is to use some decals. So you could have, even if you kept these all the same, you could have some kind of decals on the back to break up what's happening, or some sort of storytelling. Like, I know this is a well looked after church location, but if it was overgrown, you could have some like ivy growing on the back of things, or somebody's left a jacket there, you know, a cape or whatever it might be, depending on the location. Also, what's going on the side? I've just noticed this is sort of glowing. Is this a hole in the geometry, or is this the floor that's being lit by this light coming through here? Either way, that looks a bit strange. I'd say maybe put some kind of blocker in here, like a shadow blocker, to stop that happening, to allude to there being like a room down there or something. Just try and get all your focal points sorted out. I like the way you've got this kind of quite central. Everything's pointing towards that statue, and it's very important. It's pretty good that it's not exactly central. You can see you've got these archways here you can use to measure it. So here you've got one arch, and the second arch doesn't quite finish, whereas this one you've got one arch and a full second arch, so it's a little bit further along. It's super picky, but sometimes the difference between a good scene and a great scene is just being super picky about those kind of things. Again, some skylight information would really help fill out these areas a little bit with just this tiniest bit of bounce light, just because you don't want it to be jet black. Jet black sort of breaks realism. Especially here, you can see there's a lot of dark sections in this scene, which is cool for contrast, but it's not cool for realism and for selling the scene as an actual location. It gives it that kind of CG feel. So that is the feedback. Hopefully that was okay for you. If you have any questions about anything, or you want anything else clearing up, please do let me know. And for anybody else who's been watching this, if you would like to see your work being fed back on as well, let me know in the comments below. And if you like what you see, drop me a subscribe. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you later. Bye.